That morning, the snow fell so heavy it seemed to swallow the whole world in silence. In the middle of that white stillness stood an 8-year-old boy, his right arm made of cold steel, his eyes lost and frightened, abandoned on a porch by the woman who was supposed to protect him. Just when hope was about to fade, a solitary veteran and his loyal German shepherd, Max, appeared through the storm and carried the child to a small cabin on the ridge. From the torn teddy bear the boy held close, a buried secret slowly began to unfold, leading them into a dangerous journey to uncover the truth and bring justice to the dead. At Healing with Max, we share stories that heal the soul, where loyalty, faith, and quiet kindness still have the power to save what's been broken. If this story finds its way to your heart tonight, stay with us. Hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Another gentle reminder that hope still walks beside us, sometimes on 2 feet, sometimes on 4. May loyalty light your path, wherever tomorrow leads. Portland was drowning in white. Not the soft, gentle kind of snow from postcards, but the cruel kind that burned when it touched skin, a snow that erased color, warmth, and sound. Every streetlight flickered under the storm's breath, and the air itself felt sharp, slicing through the lungs like shards of frozen glass. The city, usually humming with noise, had fallen still, its heart muffled beneath layers of ice. At the edge of that silence stood a yellow house, neat, proper, pretending to be kind. Its porch light glowed faintly in daylight, a stubborn flame trembling in defiance of the wind. And under that light, a little boy stood barefoot. His name was Samuel, 8 years old, too small for the world, too thin for the winter that wrapped around him like punishment. His hair, brown and tangled, clung to his forehead in icy strands. His cheeks were raw and flushed from cold, his lips cracked, the corners trembling with each breath. His sweater, once white, was now a damp, heavy gray, clinging to his shaking frame. And his right arm ended not in flesh but in metal, a prosthetic limb, dull steel and bolts, glinting faintly against the snow like a wound the world refused to forget. He held a torn teddy bear tight to his chest, the only thing left that still felt like home. The bear's fur was patchy, its button eye missing, the seams splitting like old scars. The boy pressed his face into it, as though the faint scent of fabric could protect him from the truth, that the door behind him had just slammed shut. From the window above, a shadow moved, a woman's shadow. Victoria Hale, the stepmother. She was tall and perfectly put together, the kind of beauty that froze rather than warmed. Her hair was the color of polished ash, her posture precise as if measured by a ruler. She wore a silk robe, the deep red of wine, and a thin chain glinted around her neck. Her eyes, behind the frosted glass, looked down not with worry but with contempt, as if the small, shivering figure on the porch were not a child, but an inconvenience left out with the trash. "Stay out there until you learn," she had said moments before, her voice smooth and cold. Then came the slam, the sound of the lock. The silence that followed was worse. Samuel had cried out, softly at first, thinking she might open the door again, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. He called please once, twice, until the word broke in his throat. After that, he stopped. The cold was teaching him what she never said aloud. No one was coming. The boy sank to his knees, clutching the teddy so tightly that his knuckles, what remained of them, turned white. His breath came in short, visible bursts, trembling like frightened birds. The metal of his prosthetic arm was turning white with frost. His bare toes were red, then purple, half buried in the snow that climbed higher with each gust of wind. He looked small, heartbreakingly small, against the endless white that didn't care whether he lived or froze. Then, through the roar of wind, something moved. At first it was only a shape, dark, slow, purposeful, cutting through the storm with a steady rhythm. Samuel blinked, unsure if it was real or a trick of the cold. The figure grew larger, clearer, until it took form. A German shepherd, sable-coated, fur thick and dusted with snow, eyes bright and searching. The animal moved with the grace of something trained to survive, every step deliberate, head low, tail firm, a protector emerging from the blizzard. The dog stopped at the foot of the porch, ears pricked. Then, with a soundless command from somewhere unseen, it began to climb the steps. Samuel flinched, pressing himself against the wall, the teddy bear crushed against his chest. But the dog did not growl. Instead, it stood before him, quiet, steady, and warm. Its breath fogged the air between them, and then came the man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his olive-green military jacket dusted white. Raymond Cole, mid-50s, with iron-gray hair and a face lined not by age but by battles, the kind you fight both on the field and afterward when no one's watching. His eyes were dark, watchful, the kind that saw pain long before anyone spoke it. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, taking in the scene. The small boy trembling, the overturned bucket, the locked door, the kind of silence that said everything words could not. He spoke softly, but his voice carried over the storm. "You'll freeze out here, kid." Samuel didn't answer. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His gaze darted toward the door, that locked, lifeless door, then back at the man. Raymond's face softened. He climbed the steps slowly, his boots creaking on the wood. When he reached the boy, he didn't ask questions. He simply removed his jacket, the kind lined with years of service and memory, and wrapped it around the child. The fabric swallowed him whole. "There," Raymond murmured. "Better." The boy's shoulders shook, but not just from the cold now, from the strange shock of being touched gently. Max, the German shepherd, stepped closer and pressed his warm body against Samuel's legs, forming a barrier between him and the storm. The boy's metal arm brushed the dog's fur, and Max didn't flinch. Instead, he stayed still, breathing softly, his weight grounding the child back to life. Raymond crouched. "Where's your folks?" Samuel's eyes filled but didn't spill. He shook his head once. The prosthetic caught the light as he raised it instinctively, as if to hide behind it. Raymond said nothing more. He just sighed, a quiet, heavy sound that carried the weight of too many winters and too many children left behind. Without another word, he lifted the boy. Samuel was light, frighteningly so. As Raymond shifted him into his arms, something fell. A soft thud onto the porch. The teddy bear. Raymond bent to pick it up. It was heavier than it should have been. When he turned it in his hand, a faint metallic sound came from within, not loud, but enough to catch his attention. He frowned, but the storm was howling again, swallowing the sound before it could linger. He tucked the bear under his arm and turned toward the street. Max led the way, paws carving paths through the drifts. Raymond followed, his steps steady, the boy held close against his chest. Behind them, the yellow house faded into the blur of white, its porch light flickering like a dying ember that refused to go out. When they reached the truck, Raymond set the boy inside, shutting the door gently. Max leapt in after, curling around the child's feet. The heater sputtered to life, filling the cab with the faint scent of gasoline and thawing leather. Samuel's eyes fluttered half-closed, his face pale and peaceful for the first time in who knows how long. Raymond looked at him for a long moment, then at the teddy bear resting beside him. He turned it once more, feeling that strange, uneven weight inside. The headlights cut through the storm as the truck rolled forward. Outside, the snow fell slower, heavier, like the sky itself was listening. And there, in the back seat, wrapped in an old coat and guarded by a watchful dog, a boy finally closed his eyes. Not in fear this time, but in the fragile safety of a world that had chosen, at last, not to leave him outside. The storm hadn't passed. It had only changed its song. Outside Raymond's cabin, the wind howled through the pine trees like a chorus of distant drums, their rhythm echoing against the metal roof. Snow slapped against the windows in uneven bursts, then fell silent, then returned again, restless as grief itself. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning cedar and melting frost, the slow crackle of the stove breaking the quiet. Samuel sat near the hearth, a small bundle swallowed by the oversized army coat. His hair had dried in wild, uneven tufts that caught the glow of the fire, and his bare feet, wrapped now in wool socks, curled on the rug like timid things learning to be warm again. He didn't speak. He only watched the flames twist and fold, his eyes following every flicker as if trying to memorize the shape of safety. Every so often his shoulders would twitch, a faint flinch from a world that had never stopped hurting. Max lay beside him, his body stretched out long and heavy, head resting on his front paws. The dog's eyes never fully closed. Even in stillness, they moved, scanning every shadow that crossed the walls. The firelight painted amber in his gaze, and the rise and fall of his chest came slow, patient. The rhythm of a soldier's companion who had forgotten war but not vigilance. Raymond was at the table drying the last of the boy's things with a towel that had seen better days. He turned the battered teddy bear over in his hands, pressing the fabric gently, testing the seams for moisture. It was old, maybe older than the child, but something about it felt wrong. He felt it again, that uneven weight. He frowned, thumb running along the thread until he found a rough patch just under the left arm. Years of instinct, the kind that came from dismantling weapons, not toys, made him reach for the pocket knife in his jacket. He cut carefully, separating just enough of the stitching to peek inside. The fire's glow hit a glimmer of metal. A small silver key, no larger than a thumbnail, rolled into his palm. Raymond turned it between his fingers, wiping away a bit of lint, and there it was. The engraving, CT 417. The letters were etched deep, deliberate, as if meant to be found by the right hands. He stared at it a long moment, the flame reflecting off the cool silver. A bank code, perhaps, or a message from a man who had no other way left to speak. Raymond didn't know yet, but the weight of it settled into his chest like a whisper from the dead. Behind him the stove popped, and Samuel stirred. The boy's head lifted slightly, eyes half open, then fell back against the coat's collar. Exhaustion had wrapped around him thicker than the wool blanket. Raymond watched for a while, the way the boy's chest rose and fell, the slow rhythm of fragile peace. He tucked the key into his pocket, stitched the teddy back by hand, rough but secure, and placed it beside the child. Hours passed. The storm outside softened into a steady hiss against the roof, and the cabin dimmed to a world of orange light and slow breathing. Raymond leaned back in his chair, half awake, half watching. Old habits didn't sleep easily. He thought of the key, the letters engraved, CT initials maybe, a man's name, or a woman's, or perhaps a place. He could almost feel the story trying to climb out of that small piece of metal, and the more he tried to ignore it, the louder the silence became. Sometime past midnight, a sound broke the quiet. A small gasp. Then another. Raymond sat up. Samuel was trembling, not in fever but in memory, his head tossed lightly against the pillow, breath catching in fragments. "Dad," the boy whispered, voice cracking in his sleep. "Don't let her. Pour it." The last word tangled with a sob. Then came silence. Raymond rose slowly, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. He knelt beside the small cot, placing a steadying hand near the boy's shoulder without touching him. "You're all right, son," he said quietly. But the boy wasn't dreaming of the storm. His tears came from someplace deeper. When Samuel's eyes fluttered open, he didn't look surprised to find Raymond there. He just stared into the dark, eyes unfocused. "I heard him coughing," the boy murmured, his voice small and raw. He said don't let her pour it." Then it got quiet. Raymond didn't ask who he was. He already knew the shape of cruelty too well to need names. He only nodded once, slow and deliberate. His hands, rough and steady, folded in front of him as his gaze lowered to the floor. He'd heard many last words in his life, from soldiers, friends, strangers, and they all shared one truth. Dying men rarely lied. Max lifted his head then, ears twitching at a sound only he could hear. His gaze shifted toward the window, toward the wind moaning beyond the glass. He gave a low growl, soft but deep, the kind that wasn't born of fear, but of promise. Raymond met the dog's eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. The quiet agreement of two old souls who had both seen too much injustice left unburied. The fire burned low. The last log cracked open, sending a shower of sparks upward. Raymond rose, fed the stove another piece of wood, and turned back toward the sleeping child. Samuel had drifted off again, his small hand still clutching the teddy's ear. The key's faint outline pressed through the fabric, glinting once before the flame dimmed. Raymond reached into his pocket and took out the silver key again. He held it in his palm, turning it over slowly, the engraved letters catching the dying light. "CT 417, he murmured under his breath, the words tasting unfamiliar but heavy. He closed his fist around it, the cold metal biting into his skin, grounding him on purpose. He looked toward Max, whose eyes reflected the same faint light, unwavering, ready. "Tomorrow," Raymond said softly, more to himself than to the dog. "We find what this unlocks." The storm outside shifted once more, rattling the cabin walls, but inside, a different kind of silence settled. Not the silence of fear this time, but of resolve. The kind that always comes before truth is forced into the light. The morning came thin and cold, the kind of light that didn't warm anything. It only revealed what the night had tried to hide. Frost clung to the truck's windows like lacework, and the pines bowed under the weight of the snow. Raymond brushed ice from the windshield with a gloved hand, breath fogging in the air. Samuel sat quietly in the passenger seat, the teddy bear in his lap, Max's head resting across his knees. The dog's breath steamed against the glass, fogging it, then clearing, like a pulse between two worlds. The truck rattled to life, the engine coughing before it settled into a steady growl. Raymond adjusted his coat collar and glanced at the rearview mirror, scanning the empty road. "We'll be back before noon," he said, mostly to fill the silence. Samuel nodded without looking up. He was staring at the key in Raymond's hand, small, silver, and cold, dangling from a bit of string. Its engraving caught the light. CT 417. Portland's downtown was half buried in slush, the sidewalks slick and treacherous. Steam rose from manholes like faint ghosts, and people moved through the cold in quick, impatient strides, faces buried in scarves. The bank sat at the end of Hawthorne Avenue, an old brick building with brass letters dulled by decades of weather. Raymond parked across the street, the tires crunching through ice. Max gave a low chuff from the back seat, as if to say he didn't like the feel of this place. Inside, the air was warm but sterile. A faint scent of metal polish and paper hung between marble walls. The clerk, a man in his early 30s with thinning blonde hair and round spectacles, looked up from his desk as they entered. His nameplate read E. Sandler. He smiled politely at first, the kind of smile people wear when they don't yet realize trouble has walked in. "Morning," Raymond said, sliding the key across the counter. The sound of it striking wood was sharper than he intended. The clerk blinked, took the key gingerly, and turned it under the light. "Box 417, he murmured, reading the engraving. His tone changed subtly, softer, more careful. "May I see your identification, sir?" Raymond reached into his jacket, not for a driver's license but for something older. A small metal badge, scuffed and dulled with time. The U.S. Army insignia caught the clerk's eye. He hesitated, swallowing. "Ah, yes, of course." His gaze flicked briefly toward Samuel, then back to the key. "This box belongs to Richard Turner," he said quietly, "deceased last month." The name struck the air like a bell. Samuel's head lifted. His small fingers tightened on the Teddy's arm. Raymond said nothing, only nodded once, the faintest motion of acknowledgement. Moments later, they were led downstairs through a corridor lined with safety boxes. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. At the far end, the clerk stopped and inserted the key into a slot. A soft click. The door opened. Inside the metal box lay a notebook, several folded documents, and a flash drive sealed in a small plastic bag. The notebook's edges were frayed, its cover stained, as though it had traveled through rain and fear before finding this resting place. Raymond opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was trembling, uneven but legible. "If anything happens to me, it isn't an accident. Trust no one, not even those in uniform." The words seemed to breathe from the page, trembling under the weight of their truth. Raymond's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough cover-ups in his years of service to know that when a dying man writes something like that, he means it. He slid the papers and flash drive into his coat pocket, closed the box, and turned to leave. But Max was already standing rigid, fur bristling, ears angled toward the entrance. The low growl started in his chest, quiet but certain. Through the glass doors at the far end of the lobby, a black SUV sat idling, two men inside, faces obscured by tinted windows, waiting. Raymond's body tensed, instincts sharpening like a blade finding its edge again after years of rust. He didn't speak. He simply nodded once to Max, a silent command. The clerk looked up, startled. "Sir, is not a word," Raymond said, his tone low. "Tell no one we were here." They stepped out into the sunlight. The air had turned brittle, cutting through layers of cloth. Raymond opened the truck's door, ushering Samuel and Max inside. As he started the engine, the SUV rolled forward, slow, deliberate. Samuel looked out the window, confusion turning into fear. "Are they following us?" Raymond's eyes stayed on the mirror. "Keep your seatbelt on, son." The streets ahead twisted between narrow rows of old buildings, the snow packed into slick ribbons of ice. Tires hissed on the road as the SUV closed the distance. Raymond's hands gripped the wheel tighter. He turned left without signaling, tires skidding slightly, the engine growling low. Max braced himself, paws pressed against the seat. Behind them a horn blared. Then came the glint of sunlight on metal, a gun barrel slipping from a half-lowered window. "Down!" Raymond barked. The shot cracked the silence like a whip. Glass exploded from the rear window, scattering diamonds of ice and sunlight through the cab. Samuel ducked, arms over his head, Max curling around him like a shield. Raymond took a hard turn down an alleyway, snow spraying up from under the tires. The SUV followed, fishtailing, its tires shrieking against the frozen ground. The alley narrowed, too tight for hesitation. Raymond's breath came steady, eyes locked ahead. His voice calm but commanding. "Hold on." He cut the wheel sharply, the truck sliding sideways before catching grip again. The SUV's driver tried to follow, but the ice was merciless. The vehicle skidded, spun once, then slammed, nose first, into a snowbank with a hollow, metallic crunch. The world went still for half a heartbeat. Then Raymond accelerated, the truck roaring back onto the main road. He didn't look back. Some fights weren't won by bullets. They were won by keeping the living alive. Minutes passed. The road widened, the city fading behind them. Samuel lifted his head slowly, eyes wide. "Are we safe?" Raymond exhaled through his nose. "For now." His gaze flicked toward Max, who had turned to look out the rear window, hackles still half raised. "But they'll come again." They drove in silence for miles, the landscape flattening into open stretches of snow and gray sky. The rhythm of the tires against the road was the only sound, steady and distant, like a heart refusing to give up. Then, at a traffic light on the edge of nowhere, Raymond's phone vibrated. The screen glowed against the dim interior. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice, low and deliberate, filled the line. "I know what happened to Richard. Meet me tonight." The call ended. No name, no location, just static and silence. Raymond stared at the phone, the reflection of the red light washing over his face. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of sirens from far behind. Max lifted his head, watching him closely. Samuel reached for the teddy bear again, pressing it to his chest as if to guard whatever truth it carried. Raymond tightened his grip on the wheel, the light flicking from red to green. Then the truck moved forward, into whatever waited beyond the snow. The Evergreen Motel was the kind of place built for forgetting. Its paint had long surrendered to the cold, and its neon sign buzzed weakly above the snow like a dying heartbeat. Vacancy flickering in and out against the dark. Wind pushed drifts of snow up the side of the building, half-burying doors that hadn't been opened in weeks. Raymond parked the truck under a lone street lamp, the light bending through the frost-streaked glass. Inside the cab, Samuel was half asleep, head resting on Max's flank. The dog's eyes, however, were wide open, alert, golden, waiting. Room 6 was at the far end of the lot, its curtain drawn tight and a single lamp burning behind the glass. Raymond stepped out, boots crunching the snow, and approached quietly. When he knocked once, the door cracked open an inch, and a woman's voice came through, low, unsteady, trembling from years of secrets. "You came," she said, more as confession than greeting. Dorothy Myers stood in the doorway, early 50s, short and thin, her nurse's scrubs replaced by a plain gray cardigan buttoned wrong at the collar. Her hair, once blonde, had gone the color of ashes. The fine lines on her face weren't from age but from sleepless nights and guilt that never thawed. Her hands shook when she reached up to close the door behind him, as if each movement cost her something invisible. "Sit," she whispered. Raymond obeyed, the chair creaking beneath his weight. Dorothy glanced once toward the frosted window before pulling something from her pocket. A small voice recorder, scratched, scuffed, held together by a strip of tape. "This is all I have left," she said, "and all I have to make peace with." She pressed play. At first, only static filled the room, the hiss of silence fighting to be heard. Then, through the distortion, came a man's voice, rough, strained, on the edge of panic. "You're poisoning me, Victoria. You'll never get his trust fund." Then the sound of a glass shattering, a crash, and a choked breath that ended too soon. Dorothy's eyes glistened. "He was gone before I got there," she said, her voice cracking like thin ice. "I tried to stop it, but she paid me. She said the boy would be taken care of. She said it was mercy." She looked at Raymond then, and in that look was every ounce of shame a soul could carry. "I was paid to keep quiet, but I can't die with it." Raymond's face didn't change. Only his hands, folded on his knees, tightened slightly. "You did the right thing coming here," he said softly. "But you understand what happens next?" Dorothy nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I do. I can't live with the noise in my head anymore." Behind them, Max stirred. The soft whine that left his throat wasn't from restlessness, but from instinct, the kind that precedes danger. His ears pricked forward, and his gaze fixed on the curtain. Raymond noticed. The air changed, the kind of silence that falls when the world inhales before breaking. Then came the sound. 3 heavy knocks. Dorothy froze. The lamp flickered once, twice. Raymond rose from his chair, motion slow and deliberate, every muscle remembering what to do even after years of pretending he'd forgotten. He turned off the light, motioned for Dorothy to stay quiet, and stepped toward the door. Through the peephole, the world narrowed to one sharp image. 2 men standing under the yellow light, shoulders squared, one with a hand already reaching into his coat. Their faces were blank, professional, the kind of men who didn't carry names, only orders. Raymond moved in silence. He turned back, signaled to Samuel, under the bed now. The boy obeyed without a sound, clutching the teddy bear to his chest. Max crouched low, every muscle taut, teeth bared but silent, his eyes locked on the door. The first kick hit like thunder. The door shuddered, cracked along its frame. On the second, it burst open. Snow rushed in, carrying the smell of metal and danger. Max lunged. The motion was pure instinct, fluid, fierce, unstoppable. The first intruder never saw him coming. The dog hit him full in the chest, knocking him backward into the snow. A shout, a gun clattering onto the ground, a flash of panic that lasted less than a heartbeat. Max's growl echoed down the corridor, deep, primal, final. The second man fired once into the air and ran, boots slipping on ice as he disappeared into the storm. Raymond followed him only far enough to make sure he was gone, then turned back toward the room. The first intruder lay groaning in the snow, arm twisted awkwardly, breath steaming in the cold. Raymond kicked the gun out of reach and slammed the door shut. Inside, Dorothy was trembling, both hands over her mouth. Samuel crawled from under the bed, eyes wide but dry. Raymond knelt beside him, checked his shoulder, his pulse. "You're all right?" he said quietly. The boy nodded. Max moved back to them, muzzle flecked with snow, tail low but steady, the old soldier's dog, calm after chaos. Sirens began to rise in the distance, faint at first, then closer, a chorus of the city's delayed conscience. Blue and red lights flickered through the snow as police cars skidded to a halt outside. Officers shouted, doors slammed, the night filled with the noise of the aftermath. But inside room 6, the only sound was the soft whir of the recorder still spinning on the table, replaying the moment of truth that had finally escaped the dark. Dorothy sat down, face buried in her hands, whispering to no one. "I should have spoken sooner." Raymond pocketed the recorder, the small device now heavier than any weapon he'd ever held. He stood in the doorway as the sirens wailed, the wind carrying echoes of what could never be unsaid. Then he looked at Samuel, the boy who had already seen too much, who still waited for someone to tell him the world could be kind again. "This ends in court," Raymond said quietly, almost to himself. "Not the ground." The words hung there, like a promise to the living, and a warning to the dead. The courthouse stood like a stone sentinel against the weight of the sky. Snow didn't fall that day. It drifted, slow and gray, the color of ash. The steps leading up to the entrance were slick with ice, and the flag above it hung limp, half frozen in the still air. Raymond paused before climbing, the collar of his coat pulled high, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes that had seen too many battles and too little mercy. Beside him, Samuel clutched the teddy bear tight under one arm, the steel of his prosthetic glinting faintly against the pale morning light. Max padded close, his paws silent on the marble steps, head low, tail still. Inside, the warmth was deceptive. The air vibrated with whispers, each one carrying the weight of scandal, betrayal, and money. Words that had already stained the lives of everyone in that room. Wooden pews creaked under the shifting of bodies. The smell of old varnish and coffee clung to the air, mixing with the scent of anxiety. At the defense table sat Victoria Hale, her beauty sharpened by artifice. The black silk of her dress shimmered faintly under the courtroom lights. Her hair swept into a perfect chignon that failed to hide the tension in her jaw. Her hands, manicured, trembling, clutched a handkerchief embroidered with her initials. Tears glittered on her cheeks, but they sat wrong, too practiced, too deliberate. Beside her sat Robert Steele, a man in his 40s with a square jaw, dark suit, and the kind of confidence that only money could purchase. His expression was one of calculated calm, though his fingers drummed faintly on the tabletop, a rhythm betraying unease. Across the aisle, Raymond guided Samuel to the witness bench. The boy's steps were careful, steady, his small frame swallowed by a navy sweater that seemed too big for him. Max followed, lying down at Raymond's feet with quiet dignity, his gaze fixed on the front, as though he too understood the gravity of this battlefield made of wood and truth. The judge entered, an elderly man named Harold Whitcomb, gray-bearded and stern, his voice cutting through the murmurs like cold wind. "Court is now in session." The room fell still. The prosecutor, a woman in her late 30s with auburn hair tied neatly at her neck, stood and addressed the room. Her tone was calm, deliberate. "Your Honor, today we present evidence pertaining to the death of Mr. Richard Turner, a man silenced not by fate but by greed." She gestured toward Raymond, who rose and approached the bench. The veteran's steps were heavy but measured, the kind of walk that came from carrying both truth and ghosts. He placed the voice recorder on the evidence table, its scratched casing dull under the fluorescent lights. Then came a flash drive, marked and sealed. This, he said, voice steady, was what his son carried unknowingly in a toy. The recorder clicked. Static filled the room, then cleared into the rasping echo of a man's final words. "You're poisoning me, Victoria. You'll never get his trust fund." Gasps rippled across the room. The sound of a glass shattering followed, then silence, deep, dreadful, irreversible. The court stenographer paused, pen hovering midair. Victoria flinched. Robert shifted, his composure cracking as his jaw tightened. The prosecutor turned, her voice calm but cutting. "We also have financial records," she said, tapping a folder. "Forged transfers traced through offshore accounts linked to Ms. Hale and Mr. Steele. The USB drive contains backup copies, handwritten confirmations from the deceased." The evidence screen flickered to life, displaying scanned pages, signatures, numbers, and a photograph of Richard Turner dated a week before his death. His eyes in the photo still carried hope. That, more than any document, drew the first tear from Samuel. Raymond reached down, resting a calloused hand on the boy's shoulder. "Easy, son," he murmured, barely audible. Max leaned his head closer, his warmth anchoring the moment. The judge nodded slowly. "Proceed," he said. When the prosecutor finished, silence returned, heavy, suffocating, absolute. Then came the question that turned silence into truth. Judge Whitcomb adjusted his glasses, gazed steady on Samuel. "Son," he said, his tone softening, "do you remember your father's last words?" The boy hesitated, his lower lip trembling once, then still. Slowly he raised his right arm, the prosthetic catching the courtroom's light, gleaming like forged silver. His voice came quiet but unwavering. He said, "She put something in his drink." The words landed like thunder. No one moved. The air itself seemed to flinch. Victoria's face crumbled, the mask of calm splintering into something raw and feral. "That's a lie!" she screamed, the handkerchief falling from her grip. Her voice cracked, brittle under the weight of truth. Robert's fist slammed against the table, loud, hollow, desperate. Papers fluttered to the floor like falling leaves. The judge's gavel struck once, the echo rolling through the chamber like the sound of justice remembering its voice. "Order! Order in the court!" But even as the room trembled, something inside it began to settle. The shifting of hearts when lies finally end. Victoria sank into her chair, shoulders shaking. Robert turned away, face pale, sweat beading at his temple. The prosecutor closed her folder, the faintest sigh escaping, not of victory, but of relief. Raymond exhaled slowly, every muscle in his body releasing tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Samuel sat still, eyes locked forward, breathing uneven but steady. Max rose quietly and placed his head on the boy's knee, grounding him once more in the present. The judge's verdict came not with flourish, but with weight. This court finds sufficient evidence to proceed to conviction. Ms. Hale and Mr. Steele will be remanded into custody pending sentencing. His gavel struck again, final, resonant. Outside, the snow continued to fall, softer now, lighter, as though the sky itself exhaled. Reporters called out names, cameras flashed. But inside the courthouse, it was not noise that filled the air. It was released. Grief and relief, pain and peace tangled into one breath. Samuel turned toward Raymond, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is it over?" Raymond looked down, his face gentled by something rare. Peace. "Not over," he said quietly. but it's right. He stood, straightened his coat, and guided the boy out of the courtroom. Max followed close, his paws leaving faint marks on the marble floor, the tracks of a guardian who had seen justice done. And behind them, the echo of the gavel still lingered, not a sound of punishment, but of truth finally breathing again. Spring didn't arrive all at once in Portland. It crept in like an apology, slow and hesitant, tracing thin veins of meltwater along the gutters and curling around the roots of half-buried pines. The city had been gray for so long that color itself felt like a miracle. A timid blush of green on the hillside, a robin daring to sing. The courthouse where justice had finally spoken was now just another building behind them, its cold steps fading from memory. Yet for Raymond and the boy, something had changed that winter morning. The weight that had followed them, of fear, guilt, silence, had loosened its grip, one quiet breath at a time. Up on the ridge, the cabin waited, the same four walls that had once echoed with wind and emptiness. Now, the same wind carried a gentler sound. Laughter. It came from inside, small at first, then sure, bright as the crackle of kindling catching fire. Samuel's laugh. It was the kind that could mend broken timbers just by being heard. The boy was different now. His hair, once damp and matted from that night on the porch, had grown longer, curling slightly at the ends. His cheeks had color again. His right arm, steel and jointed, glinted faintly in the stove's light as he tried, unsuccessfully, to balance a wooden cup on it. Raymond watched from the table, hiding a smile behind his coffee mug. The cup fell, clattering across the floor, and Samuel laughed again, unbothered. "Closer this time," Raymond said. "Next time I'll get it," the boy replied, his voice full of something new. Confidence. Max stretched beside the stove, his sable fur catching the warmth. His eyes tracked every movement in the room, not out of caution now, but habit. The kind of quiet vigilance that never leaves a soldier's dog. His tail thumped softly whenever Samuel passed him by, and sometimes, when the boy thought no one was watching, he'd whisper something to Max, and the dog would tilt his head, as if giving counsel. By afternoon, sunlight slanted through the pines outside, throwing long shadows across the snow that still clung stubbornly to the ridge. Raymond and Samuel worked together in the yard, fixing a broken shutter, patching the fence where the storm had split the rails. The air smelled of sawdust and thawing earth. Max trotted between them, nose buried in old footprints, occasionally pausing to bark at nothing but the echo of his own joy. Inside, the kettle began to hum. Raymond called out, "Hot chocolate's ready!" Samuel ran in, boots muddy, hair full of pine needles, cheeks red from cold. He stopped by the doorway, panting, a grin bright on his face. For a moment, Raymond saw something in him, the reflection of the man his father once was, not in the features, but in the spirit. Determined, kind, unwilling to give up on warmth even when the world turned cruel. That evening, as the last light slipped through the trees, Raymond sat by the fire carving a piece of cedar, the rhythmic scrape of the knife mingled with the low pop of the burning logs. Samuel sat cross-legged beside him, clutching a small notebook he had found in one of Raymond's drawers. It was old, the leather cracked, the pages half filled with words from years gone by. "Were these from the war?" Samuel asked quietly. Raymond paused. "Some of them." "Do you ever miss it?" The man's hand froze mid-cut. He looked at the fire for a long time before answering. "I miss the ones who didn't come back, but not the fighting." The boy nodded, his prosthetic hand resting against his knee. The firelight caught the steel, turning it gold. Max, lying nearby, raised his head and rested it gently on Samuel's leg. The boy smiled and scratched behind his ear. After a while, Samuel whispered, "Can I write in it too?" Raymond nodded. "It's yours now." The boy opened the book carefully, as if afraid to wake the ghosts still living in its pages. He wrote slowly, the letters uneven but determined. When he was done, he turned it around for Raymond to see. One sentence, small but steady. "Dear Dad, we're safe now." Raymond swallowed hard. His rough fingers brushed the edge of the page, then closed the book. "He'd be proud of you," he said. Outside, the night deepened. The pines swayed in slow rhythm, their needles whispering secrets only the forest understood. The cabin's windows glowed amber against the cold. Inside, warmth breathed in every corner, in the boy's laughter, in the dog's heartbeat, in the man's quiet exhale. Later that night, Samuel fell asleep in the armchair, the bear tucked under his chin, his small chest rising and falling in peace. Max lay beside him, head resting near the boy's feet, eyes half closed but always aware. Raymond sat by the fire, watching them both. His thoughts wandered to the battles he'd fought, to the ones he'd lost, and to the one he hadn't known he was still fighting, the war against loneliness. Somehow, in this little cabin, the world had given him a reason to stand guard again. The flames cast a soft glow on the steel arm that rested across Samuel's lap. It shimmered like something reborn, a symbol not of what was lost, but of what endured. Raymond leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper over the fire's sigh. "Sometimes, son," he said, "the things we lose teach us how to hold on." The words hung there, not as wisdom but as truth, fragile, earned, and shared. Outside, the first flakes of a new snowfall drifted down, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the kind of storm that frightened or broke things. It was gentler, quieter, like forgiveness finding its way home. The pine branches bent under the weight of it, yet didn't crack. The world, for once, seemed content to simply breathe. Raymond rose, draped a blanket over the boy, and opened the door just enough to let the night air in. Max padded to his side, nose twitching, ears alert. The wind carried faint scents of pine resin, smoke, and faraway rain. "You did good, boy," Raymond murmured, patting his head. Max leaned against his leg, a silent answer. Together, they looked out into the night, the cabin behind them glowing like a heartbeat in the snow. The path that had once led to danger now led only to peace. And for the first time in a long while, the soldier didn't feel the need to keep his rifle close. He closed the door gently, and as the latch clicked, the snow fell thicker, not heavy, not cold, but calm. Somewhere between the falling snow and the sleeping child, peace settled. Not loud, not sudden, but finally true. When the storm passed, what remained wasn't just justice. It was something softer. A wounded boy found warmth again. A weary soldier remembered why he still stood. And a loyal dog reminded them both that love can guard in silence, long after the danger is gone. This story isn't about victory. It's about the quiet kind of courage. The kind that holds you upright when the world has gone cold. It's about loyalty that doesn't need words, kindness that arrives unannounced, and the strength it takes to protect what's still good in this world. Maybe that's what healing truly is. Not forgetting what happened, but finding a way to live gently afterward. If this story reached a quiet corner of your heart tonight, stay with us. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Another small light, another reminder that hope still walks among us. Sometimes on 2 feet, sometimes on 4.